is A Quiet Place Part 2. I think if I remember right, we all liked the first one. So that was a high thrice approved movie. So let's see what we thought of the new one that made like $40 million at the box office this week. So this was the true return to cinemas this week. Zach, go for it.
Okay, so A Quiet Place Part 2, directed by John Krasinski. You kind of wonder, could he be in this movie? And he is in this movie. I think we should talk about the spoilers to this movie. I'll kind of give the summary of this movie, and then I think at a certain point we should mention that we want to go into spoilers. But okay, so A Quiet Place Part 2, spoiler free, takes off where the events of the first movie end. We have Emily Blunt as the mother of this family who is living in this world full of creatures that are terrifying, and they can move really fast. They have one fatal flaw, which is that they are blind, but they have exaggerated senses of hearing. So even the slightest bit of noise makes these creatures basically go crazy. I mean, you look at these creatures, and actually, in this movie, you got a better view of the creatures than you did in the first movie, and they have a really interesting design to them. They almost don't have faces. They're almost like flowers or something with like vestibules that are like open. Really interesting, really frightening character design. Anyway, Emily Blunt has, I think, is it 3 children in this movie? One of her children is deaf. She's played by Millicent Simmons, and I think Krasinski made a really smart decision in this movie to make a big part of this movie focusing on that character. I think in many ways, that daughter character is more interesting than the Emily Blunt character or maybe any other characters in the movie. As they kind of go along in the movie, they are forced to seek out shelter. They find a character named Emmett, played by Cillian Murphy. He is also kind of outcast and living by himself and trying to fend off these creatures. The movie in the middle kind of splits off into 2 parallel narratives. One that features Millicent Simmons and Cillian Murphy kind of paired up together, kind of seeking help. The other with the rest of the family unit. Shacked up kind of at the fortress that Cillian Murphy has developed. I don't know. I mean, look, I guess this movie is entertaining enough. I mean, you're right. It's an hour and a half. I definitely like that. I like that it focuses on the Millicent Simmons character. I think there are some genuinely frightening moments in the movie. I like that the movie has some interesting sound design. I like the opening segment of the movie too. I guess my sort of existential problem with this movie is I just don't know why it exists. I mean, I feel kind of like not too far removed exactly from Cruella. I mean, I get the sense that, I get the understanding that this movie made a lot of money 3 years ago. It was a well-made movie. John Krasinski, Emily Blunt, they have very strong cachet with their names and their branding, and they make good products. I just don't understand the point of this movie. I watched it and I remember the first movie being a little bit more intelligent, leaving a little bit more to the viewer's sort of imagination by not showing the creatures in such stark detail, even though, like I said, I was impressed by the way they looked. I thought that one of the parallel storylines worked a lot better than the other. I also didn't really understand the purpose of the Cillian Murphy character. I really thought that the movie should have just been Millicent Simmons. In fact, I think the whole movie should have just been her, maybe her and her brother. That character, the Cillian Murphy character, to me was unnecessary. It's very clear that this movie, that A Quiet Place is now a franchise, which is really unfortunate. I felt like the original movie had a lot going for it. It was unique, it was original, it was startling, it didn't rely too much on jump scares, and in the end, as John Krasinski has said a lot, was more about family than it was about terrifying audiences. So I'm mixed on this one. I give it maybe a high 2.5 stars. Maybe one of you guys can talk me out of it. I don't feel this movie was necessary in its existence, as good as some elements of it were.
All right. Well, I think I will go next after that review. I love this movie. I'm giving it 3.5 stars. Is it better than the first one? No, but it feels like it's so hard for a sequel to recapture what made the original great. And I felt like this did that in a very real way. You felt for the characters, you felt the tension, you felt the stress and the just overall anxiety that the first one brought about. And it being such a direct sequel, I get what you're saying, Zach, and why did it have to exist? But I do think it kind of it furthers the plot a little bit. It expands the universe of this this world that they're in, and I just kept thinking why this would be an amazing TV show. Like if they were to turn this into some sort of mini series about these characters and this world, it would be really really cool. Um, but I felt it was such a perfect sequel because it captured so much of what the first one did so well that I just loved it. I loved it. I think that that double feature of watching those two back to back is going to be like one of the best watches that you can have of a double feature that I can remember in a long time. So that's I think a lot of what you said is right. Um, but I just think the fact that it is such a perfect sequel, such a perfect continuation of the story, and I don't see what you're saying about why the Cillian Murphy character was around. I thought it was kind of a great addition to it. There are some little tropes that happen that's like, okay, obviously, obviously there's a significance to the towel that is going to come up, right? And there are little things that are it's not so subtle about. Um, but I feel like that's okay. Yeah, dive. But I feel like that's okay. It works. It works in the context of that, and it is so suspenseful and works so great as a sequel that I loved it. 3.5 stars for me. Todd.
Well, of course, I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a very basic horror movie sequel. Like, I agree with Zach. The first thing I thought of was I don't know why this movie exists other than to cash a check, because it is the exact same thing in terms of thrills and in terms of situations as the first one, and that doesn't mean it doesn't still work, but it just doesn't really do anything to differentiate itself other than it leaves the one area. The flashback at the beginning, I think, was cool, but that was as derivative of a horror movie concept as in either one of the movies. That seemed like a scene out of something completely different. And the final scenes were way too convenient, but that's the way it goes with these kind of things. But it heightened the emotional elements of the movie, which is probably more about performance than anything. But at the same time, in like doing those things at the same time just made it way too convenient. That also seemed like something out of a different movie, and that's probably because Krasinski was the only writer and he didn't have his buddies to help him out. But yeah, the gem and star of the movie is Millicent Simmons. She should be a star. She commands every scene that she's in and blows Cillian Murphy off the screen every time she can get. And the reason why that character exists is obviously because that's the new father figure to her, and they needed to introduce something like that into the movie. Otherwise, she would just be this little girl going across this terrible, like, land of monsters, and that would never have worked or been believable in any way. The movie gets repetitive and is way too interested in crafting the perfect scare than it actually is of making us care necessarily. We know exactly what kind of peril they're about to get into because we've seen these kind of things before, but it's still like brilliantly staged because Krasinski is a really good director. He has learned a lot from his mentor, Michael Bay, and this is like a big, rousing action movie, Michael Bay movie, but it's his Krasinski's baby, so it's nowhere near as shallow as that, but it does have a lot of things that reminded me of Michael Bay movies. I would watch another one of these because of the actors, and the monsters are unpredictable and they're kind of indestructible, which is kind of awesome to watch. But I mean, as long as Krasinski is doing stuff like this and not like The Hollers or whatever other like movies like he would normally be acting in, like those are the movies he's not great at directing. This is actually where he's in his wheelhouse. I want it to be a bit more of a step out next time because I know he's going to make another one of these. But this is I don't know. It was still a lot of fun, and probably the most fun I've had at the theater is watching just because of the experience of it since Tenet. And so I'm giving it a very like a low 3 stars. Like it's a thumbs up, but not too high.
Did we convince you, Zach?
No. I mean, I had a lot of the same reaction to you, but see, when what you guys saw, especially you, Terry, and you appreciated and really liked, I saw and thought, nah, this was like the original. I just don't. Well, why do we have to have an extension? Why is this just derivative? I mean, it's copying some of the same beats as the original. Todd's right. It does get really repetitive, like midway through the movie, and at a certain point, it almost develops like Avenger syndrome. It's like you're pretty sure at a certain point nothing too bad's going to happen to these characters. So it's kind of like, okay, well, it becomes less about life or death and more about how they're going to outwit these creatures. And you're right, Todd. I mean, it is really trying hard to set up that ending, which is just another thing. And maybe this goes into spoilers a little bit, but one of my problems with this movie also is that I felt like at the end of A Quiet Place, one of the reasons why I liked that movie so much and felt a sequel wasn't necessary was because you essentially, at the end of The Quiet Place, they discovered how to defeat these creatures. I mean, I felt like the revelation that's at the end of this movie was also at the end of the first movie, and I'm not really sure why or how this information is necessarily new. I also felt like there were some other kind of flaws about where they end up going and why the creatures aren't in that location as well that I thought was just way too convenient. And
But they don't swim.
yeah, I mean, okay, let's get M. Night Shyamalan and signs on the script. Like, that's ridiculous. I mean, these creatures have no flaws or vulnerabilities other than their eyesight. You're going to add that they can't swim? These creatures can scale buildings. They can cause huge explosions in the sky. Like, come on, get more original.
They're like giant bugs. Bugs can't swim either.
Well, I mean, but even the way that the creature gets to the island in this movie, you would think that also probably would have happened in other circumstances too. I don't know. I just thought that I liked the idea of some sort of refuge. I mean, we've seen that in other movies before too, but I just thought that the explanation was a little bit too convenient. The exposition, I should say, also was just sort of overly convenient.
Well, one thing I don't agree with what you said was that you said you knew that nothing was bad was going to happen to them. You forget in the first one, they off a child like right off the bat. Like, I mean,
yeah.
Like you don't think that there was a possibility that like the Gippy son was going to get killed? I mean, I thought he was definitely going down.
He wasn't an essential character in the movie. I mean, there's only 3 essential characters, and none of them were gonna. I mean, I don't know. Again, we're getting into spoilers here, but the most interesting character, we all agree, is Millicent Simmons, and
yes.
she's not. They're not going to kill her off. I mean, let's get real. So it becomes sort of a level of like, okay, how does she get out of this situation that we know she's going to get out of? And that just, I don't know, it's kind of deflated some of the suspense.
The one thing with her character that I didn't necessarily like, that was kind of, I mean, like in A Quiet Place too, you also had that, like, the moment where everyone went, wait, why don't they just live at the waterfall? But the thing with the Millicent Simmons character that I thought in this one is, how does she know when she's making noise? When she's by herself. Like, there are those moments where she doesn't know when noise is being made, but she reacts as if, oh no, I just made noise. It's when she can't hear it.
Yeah.
That was like the one thing I was, but there are a couple of those things that pop up that just advance the story, but honestly, I didn't care because it was just too much fun. I was along for the ride, and I enjoyed the ride.
Yeah, I mean, it's enjoyable for what it's worth. It's just, for me, it was always a reminder that the original was better. It's kind of like how last week when we talked about High Fidelity, I like the series High Fidelity. It's popcorn, it's bubblegum, but it just reminds me that the original is better. So, I understand going to the theaters and seeing it, and I applaud the filmmakers, and I think they tried their hardest, but it's just, there's nothing new. I mean, it doesn't really expand, like Todd was saying, it doesn't really expand the universe in a really creative or innovative way.
So we've got 2.5 from Zach, we got 3 from Todd, we got 3.5 from me. This is in theaters right now. Wherever there's theaters open, you will find A Quiet Place Part 2, and it's worth the watch. I think even Zach, you're giving it 2.5, but it's worth the watch.
Yeah, I mean, a good comparison would be like 10 Cloverfield Lane. Like, I wish it had been more innovative, like 10 Cloverfield Lane. I wish John Goodman had been in it instead of Cillian Murphy. But we accept what we get.
Yeah, I had the same comparison.
He did. He said 10 Cloverfield Lane several times.